So let's talk about the euro. And look, this isn't just a story about money. It's about one of the most ambitious, most complicated, and frankly, most audacious political projects in modern history.
I mean, really think about that for a second. How did an entire continent of proud ancient nations, each with centuries of history baked into their francs, their marks, their lira, just decide to give it all up for one single currency? It seems kind of impossible, right? Well, let's dive in and find out.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the dream, why they even wanted one currency. Then we'll hit the rocky road to the Maastricht Treaty, which laid out all the rules. We'll cover the biggest cash swap in history, look at the insiders and the outsiders, and then see how the euro survived a crisis that almost tore it apart. And finally, we'll ask, what's next?
Now, you might think this whole story starts with some grand vision of a united Europe. But actually, it starts with something a lot more basic, a really big mess.
See, for decades after World War II, the world had a pretty stable system called Bretton Woods. It basically anchored everything to the US dollar, which was anchored to gold. But in 1971, the US just cut the cord, and that threw global currencies into total chaos. For Europe, where everyone's economies were so tangled together, this constant up and down was a massive headache. It made trade a nightmare and really put a damper on growth.
So Europe's leaders knew they had to do something, but it was all trial and error. In 1970, you had the Werner Plan, which was kind of the first rough draft. Then in 72, they tried this thing called the currency snake, trying to force all the currencies to move together in a tight little band like a snake. It was way too rigid, and it kind of fell apart. A few years later, in 79, came the European monetary system, which was more flexible. Each of these was a step, a lesson learned, pushing them just a little bit closer to a real solution.
Okay, so all these early attempts sort of set the stage for the 80s and 90s. And this is when that abstract dream of a single currency started to feel like, hey, maybe we could actually pull this off.
The real breakthrough was the Dolores Plan in 1989. It was this super clear three-stage roadmap. Step 1, let money flow freely across all the borders, no more restrictions. Step 2, set up a European Monetary Institute, basically a dry run for a real European central bank. And then step 3, the big one. Lock in the exchange rates for good and roll out the new currency. It was smart, it was deliberate, and it actually set them on the path to get it done.
And the Maastricht Treaty in 1992 is what made that plan the law of the land. But, and this is a huge but, it came with a really steep price of entry. You couldn't just decide to join the club. You had to meet these super strict convergence criteria. It was a bargain, really. You want to share in the stability of this new euro? Then you've got to prove you can run your own economy responsibly. We're talking low inflation and tight control on your government debt and deficits. You had to get your entire economic house in order before you even got the keys.
So for years, the euro was just this concept, a virtual currency used by banks and on financial markets. But then came the truly mind-boggling part, putting actual physical euros into the hands of 300 million people.
On January 1st, 2002, 12 different countries all took the plunge at the exact same time. They said goodbye to their national currencies and hello to the brand new euro.
Let's just pause on the scale of this, because it's nuts. We're talking about printing over 7 billion banknotes and minting almost 40 billion coins. All of it had to be shipped out securely across a continent. Banks were handing out these little starter kits with the new coins so people could just see what they looked like. And the very first official purchase? It happened just after midnight on the tiny French island of Réunion for a kilo of lychees. It was a logistical operation on a scale that had never been seen before. And somehow, it worked.
But not everyone was at the party. While those 12 countries jumped in head first, some of Europe's biggest players, and you know who I'm talking about, the United Kingdom, decided to stay on the sidelines and just watch.
And this comparison right here shows you two totally different ways of thinking. The EU had these clear, hard and fast rules. Can you get your debt and deficit below these numbers? Yes or no? The UK, though, came up with its own 5 tests, and they were much more, let's say, subjective. The question wasn't just, are we disciplined enough to join? It was, is joining actually good for us, for our economy, for our businesses, for our future? It was a shift from a collective requirement to a purely national cost-benefit analysis.
And when you boil it all down, for the UK, it came down to one single powerful word: control. If they joined the euro, the Bank of England would no longer set its own interest rates. A new bank in Frankfurt would.
They couldn't devalue their currency if they needed to boost exports. And their government spending would be limited by those Maastricht rules. For the UK, that was just too much control to give up.
So for the first few years, the euro looked like a huge success. But then 2008 happened. The global financial crisis hit, and the entire project was suddenly facing a near-death experience.
All of a sudden, a question that was totally unthinkable was on everyone's lips. Could the euro actually collapse? The financial crisis turned into a massive government debt crisis, especially for countries like Greece. Investors got spooked and started to think these countries might default on their loans. Now, normally, a country in that situation could devalue its currency to become more competitive. But they couldn't. They were trapped inside the euro, and the whole foundation of the currency started to shake.
So what did they do? Well, they did the one thing the original treaties explicitly said they could never, ever do. They bailed each other out. They created these enormous emergency funds like the EFSF to loan billions of euros to the countries that were on the brink. It was hugely controversial because to save the system, they basically had to break one of its founding rules. And in exchange for those rescue loans, they demanded even tougher rules. This thing called the Fiscal Compact basically doubled down on the Maastricht criteria, giving the Union a lot more power to enforce budget discipline. The thinking was pretty clear. If we're all going to share a currency, and if we're going to rescue each other when things go wrong, then we need a lot more say over how you manage your money, just to make sure this never happens again.
So the euro survived. It was messy, it was painful, and the crisis forced it to change in ways no one had expected. But the truly remarkable thing is what happened next.
It's a total paradox. Just as everyone was predicting the euro's collapse, the club kept getting bigger. You had Slovenia, Cyprus, Malta, Slovakia, and the Baltic states all joining. They looked at all that chaos, and for them, the euro didn't look like a trap. It looked like a safe harbor in a global economic storm. So the project didn't just survive, it actually kept on growing.
Which brings us to today and a final big question. The euro was created to solve the problems of the 20th century. It survived the huge crisis of the early 21st, but now, as we face a whole new world of digital currencies, new global powers, and new economic challenges, what will the euro's next chapter look like? Well, that's a story that is still being written.